Who else, for who is it the first semester? Raise your hands. Okay, so a couple of newcomers among us. All of the senior guys here, please show us the ropes, show us around, and tell us what we should do, how we should handle ourselves, and so on. Okay, so this class is about visualization. Welcome everybody. Let's talk a little bit about what visualization is. We could define, like if you look at a dictionary, the definition of visualization is the formation of mental and visual images. So like it's an internal process of like I visualize how I'm going to perform in this classroom, for example. Or it could be the act or process of integrating in visual terms or putting into visible form. That's a little bit closer to what we're going to do, but it's not quite the right definition that I like too much. So the definition of visualization, as we will deal with it in this class, is visualization is the process that transforms abstract data into interactive graphical representations for the purpose of exploration, confirmation, and presentation. So they're all the important terms are here. Like we take data, we transform it into a graphical representation, but not just a chart. We will be talking a lot about charts, just static charts like bar charts, pie charts, and so on, but interactive graphical charts. So it's not about print visualization here, or creating graphics for print, but doing it interactively. And then this definition also includes some notion about why we use visualization. So there's three classes of use cases: exploration, confirmation, and presentation. And I'll talk about those later. So why do you want to visualize in the first place data? Of course, one of the goals is to inform humans. So how, for example, we could ask a question: how did the unemployment and labor force develop over the last years? And then we could use charts like we have here on the right. And if I click on here, I can go to the New York Times. And the New York Times is really good at doing interactive graphics. They're really good at doing data graphics. And of course, for them, it's really about communication. They're not super interested in people like putting up data sets that they don't know anything about and letting people explore them. They're more interested in telling a story. And this is one example of how they tell a story. So this is about the nation's economy. And you can see there's many charts, and they're accompanied by text here. So like we see, there's an explanation, and they highlight important events. So they tell you, okay, we had before, we have a now, and so on. So there's a lot of labeled charts. And then we have different charts. There's a shrinking middle class. And all the time, there's specific comments and a very hand-curated, clear data set. So it's really about communicating the data. In contrast to that, when a question is not well defined, we're talking about exploration. So, which combination of gene mutation causes cancer? That's not a question that we have an easy answer to. That's not something that we can easily illustrate. We could, for example, do a research project, find the answer for one particular case. We could find, okay, there is a certain statistically significant correlation between the mutation X and the development of breast cancer. And then we could use visualization to communicate that to others. But we can also use visualization in the process of finding out this information. An equal question would be, which drug can help patient X, like a specific patient, not just generally? These are questions that we don't know the answers to. We have data, we can collect data, we're trying to understand it, and we're trying to derive data and insights from it. So that's what exploration is about. And I like to think of this as a continuum. So like there's the one side where you have communication, like we saw in the New York Times. This chart here is a chart about unemployment in the Obama administration. And this is a very, very detailed chart that shows you like a very handcrafted message. So they picked the red parts here is job loss under Bush. So like you see they use the colors of the Republicans, and then suddenly we see the improvement of the market under Obama. So this is a very, like the selected time period, and it's hand curated, and you can see, okay, it was going downhill under Bush, going uphill under Obama. That's the message that they want to tell you here. Of course, there's more to this data. It's a very, very narrow defined time range and so on. But this is like communication. Then you could have confirmation here, so you have a hypothesis, you have an idea, and you're looking for data that supports it. That would be the confirmatory task, and then you have open exploration, where you simply just have multiple data sets and maybe a vague idea of what is in there or a vague idea of a goal, but you kind of do openly explore the data set. And this is an example for a cancer subtype identification. So the idea here is that you have hundreds of patients and you try to somehow classify them into meaningful clinical groups. These people have all brain cancer here, but they're classified into multiple groups versus using various algorithms. I have a better picture here, but let's go with communication first. So here's another example from the communication from the New York Times. So why Peyton Manning's record will be hard to beat. And again, this is a combination of data visualization and annotation and storytelling. So you can see these are all football players, quarterbacks, and the lines here, like on the x-axis we have the years, and on the y-axis we have the touchdown passes, like how many touchdown passes they completed. So like there's a data set in here. And yes?
Oh, I was just going to ask if we could turn off the front lights.
Sure, if I can figure out how to, I'm happy to. Way better? No.
No.
Of course. Okay. Yeah. I hope you don't fall asleep. Okay. By the way, feel free to ask questions anytime. I'm happy to have a discussion. So what we see here is we have on the x-axis we have time, on the y-axis we have the number of touchdown passes. So like if you just looked at the data set, and it's a little hard to read here, the resolution isn't that great, but I hope you get the idea. We would just have the lines, but of course here they selected a couple of players. They selected outstanding players of their time. So you have here Sammy Ball, you have Johnny Unitas, you have John Hadel, Dan Fouts, and then here Dan Marino, and then Peyton Manning. One little thing that they did, like you notice that they highlighted specific players that they think that are interesting, which is of course an element of storytelling. And they also used color for the active players, so that you get an idea, like the active players are shown in blue, so you get an idea, okay, these guys could still beat Peyton Manning if they play really well over the rest of their career. But they also argue why it's going to be hard. And there's more charts here, like again selected charts. So if you're like, when I put the slides online, you can click on those links and you can browse those visualizations in detail if you're interested. So coming back to this cancer subtype example where it's really about data exploration. So here we have two different classifications of patients. So here we have like a stratification of patients according to gene expression data. Not very important what this actually is, but this is an automatically derived classification of patients based on a clustering algorithm. And clustering, as we will hear, is noisy and not perfect. The second column here shows you a classification of patients based on a mutation or a copy number variation of a specific gene. In this case, it's EGFR. You can't read that here. But EGFR is a known cancer gene. And the red block down here are people that have many, many copies of that gene, which drives certain cancer types. And now these ribbons tell you how these blocks are related. So you can see that this block here, the second block from the bottom, okay. The second block from the bottom here seems to be strongly correlated with the block down here. So this is something that you could simply, by looking at this data, you could find out about that. And then you could look on the right here. These are what is called the Kaplan-Meier plots. These are essentially pretty nasty curves that tell you how long people live after a specific diagnosis. And the x-axis here is time. The y-axis is the percentage of people that are still alive at a certain point in time. And you can see that in the top two cases, we have better outcomes. So people tend to live longer, whereas in the bottom two cases, we have worse outcomes. And this is, of course, an interactive technique. So you could drill down here, and you could say, show me this data in detail. And then you would see, oh, these bottom two curves here, these are where you have increased copy numbers of EGFR. And you can see that these people have a much worse chance. Like after 2 years, more than 50% of them are unfortunately dead. Whereas if you don't have that specific mutation, the specific genetic event, a copy number alteration, you have a much better chance of survival, even if it's a brain cancer. So that could, of course, be interesting for a drug company to target that. And these are the kinds of insights that scientists are interested in. Why would you use graphics to do data analysis? Well, graphics has, like, our visual system has the best bandwidth. Of course, we could have computers read the data out to us nowadays, but that's probably not a very efficient way of communicating with us, because with graphics we have our eyes have high bandwidth. We are good at seeing a lot of things at once. We are good at matching patterns. So there's multiple reasons of why we use graphics. Figures are richer, they provide more information, and they have less clutter, and they can use less space. Figures provide the Gestalt effect, and we'll learn about Gestalt principles. They give you an overview. They make the structure of a data set visible, whereas if you use a table, you're not easily spotting the structure of the data set. Figures are more accessible, they're easier to understand, they're faster to grasp, they're more comprehensible, more memorable, more fun, and less formal. So today, I saw an interesting post on Twitter by a visualization guy called Alberto Cairo, and he picked up, I guess all of you know the New Yorker. The New Yorker has a strict policy, no graphics, no maps, which can sometimes be pretty tedious. So I'm just going to read out this to you. Compelled and switched to identically constructed maps, only this time based on 2010 census data, and in bits and pieces of the screen there was a simple and arresting picture of what Katrina meant. In the neighborhoods that were once a dense black, many of the little squares that thinned and turned gray. The sharp lines that once separated the teapot from central city were now blurred. The wide areas of the city were pushing north into the vacuum left by the exodus. So this is really this is a paragraph describing a map. Why not just show a map? Of course, if you have an editor who insists, well, but the New Yorker is really a little bit of a different magazine, but the New York Times, of course, does it differently. So they publish maps, they publish graphics, and many newspapers nowadays do that. And they usually produce a print version and they produce an online version. So this is just a fun example of how convoluted you can be.
Actually, did somebody do an experiment where you have a text and then they draw what they think they should see?
I think that would be a very clear result. You wouldn't this is just, I think that the idea here is really, it gives you roughly an idea of what is going on, but you can't really see it in detail. So I would be very skeptical that we would get, if I tell you draw a map of New Orleans, I roughly know where New Orleans is, but I couldn't draw a map of New Orleans. It's a completely different thing. And people did do these kinds of experiments. There are studies that compare how efficient is visualization compared to other modalities. So we will also talk about evaluation and how we show what is efficient. Of course, there's reasons and scenarios when we don't want to visualize, when we want automatic answers. So the obvious answer is we want to have automatic answers whenever we can. So if we can get the right answer with 99.5 correctness from a computer, we just want the computer to give us the answer. So that's where machine learning and algorithms and so on happens. But there's other scenarios. So but let's go a little bit more into detail when we don't want to visualize. Well, we don't want to visualize when we have well-defined questions on a well-defined data set. So if we want to ask the question, which gene is most frequently mutated in a set of patients, we don't need visualization. We can simply run an algorithm that tells us the answer, and then we'll get, this is EGFR, and that's it. We don't need visualization for that. Or what is the current unemployment rate? This is always, again, a one-line answer. We don't need context in this case, or maybe we do, then visualization might be interested. But if all we need is the answer to this question, we don't need visualization. And then there is decisions that we need in minimal time. Visualization implies that there's a human in the loop. And humans are good at certain things, but they're bad at doing things very quickly. So if you have high-frequency stock market trading, and you do that with visualization and think you get the smartest analysts and the fastest guys, you're still going to lose because computers are just much faster than you. And then if you like run a manufacturing plant for bottles and you want to see whether a bottle is broken, you also don't want to have humans do that. Of course you could, and people still do, but it's much more efficient to have a computer tell you this bottle is broken, throw it out. So if you have these high speed questions, or if you have these very well-defined questions for very well-defined data sets, then you don't need visualization. So this is like only, don't take this is not a visualization, it's like a chart like marketing people like to use, where you have two axes and you just put things there where you think they go. But we have the performance of the human here on the x-axis and the performance of the computer on the y-axis, and the different abilities of them. So computers are much better at data storage. Like if we just need to record a table with 1 million items, computers are much better at that. If you didn't need to do numerical calculations, we all would agree that computers are much better at that. Searching, finding in a well-defined data set, again, quickly done by a computer. Logic, it depends on how formalized it is, so it could be the human, depending on a question, or the computer that is better. Planning, diagnosis, and prediction, that is kind of a field that is, there's a lot of things going on with machine learning at the moment. So in this case, I would still argue that humans paired with computers probably are better at prediction, diagnosis, and planning. And then of course we have these areas of cognition, common knowledge, and creativity, where humans are much better than computers, and will be for the foreseeable future. So the idea of this chart here is really that humans and computers are complementary, and visualization is what bridges those two things. So why would you use computers to do graphics, to do visualization? Well, of course, there's scale. Drawing by hand is sometimes infeasible. So let's say you have injured your knee, or you get an MRI, and then imagine how would you interpret the data if you would like to draw it by hand. That's simply not possible. So you need a computer-drawn rendering. So of course you could have 2D renderings, those are also visualization, but you could also have these nice 3D renderings of the body. And we will talk about how to create these kinds of images in the second half of the class. And then we have, of course, computers allows us to do interaction. And interaction is very helpful also for scale. So we can deal with very large data sets using interaction. So here's an example. A well-known tree visualization technique. It's not that important that you know how it exactly works, but what you see here is a tree, a hierarchy of the data. This is called a sunburst. And what is happening here, this is a very deep hierarchy, and the mouse here is moving around and selecting different segments of the tree, and these are popping out and are shown in detail. So here we can simply drill down into a data set and look at deeper parts of the data set in more detail. And this is, of course, something that you can't do on paper, that you can't do by hand, so you need computers to do that. Why else would you use computers? Of course, efficiency. Once I have implemented a raycasting algorithm that draws me these nice pictures of MRI data, I don't have to do it again, but I would have to do the sketch again. So we can reuse charts, we can reuse methods for different data sets. Of course, sometimes it's good to customize them, but we can reuse much of the basics. We have qualities, computers can give us very precise drawings and renderings, versus humans are not as precise in their drawings, in their renderings. And we can use storytelling, we can use time, so we can essentially do something like playing a video. You can do, of course, you can do the sketch-based and record it and then play a video, but with computers that's much easier. So here's a nice example of storytelling.
Mariano Rivera is one of the most dominant closers in history. But what may be most remarkable is that he has done it by...
Can you guys hear that? I don't see an audio plug here. I'll bring one next time. I hope it works.
Mariano Rivera is one of the most dominant closers in history. But what may be most remarkable is that he has done it by confounding hitters with mostly one pitch, his signature cutter. John Flaherty of the Yes Network faced Rivera as a hitter and also caught him when he played for the Yankees.
From a hitter's standpoint, he's out on the mound and it feels like he's not even putting any effort into it, and the ball explodes on you. And from a catching standpoint, he's the easiest guy ever to catch because he throws the ball right where you want it.
Rivera uses a seemingly effortless delivery, which he can flawlessly repeat pitch after pitch. His cutter is thrown very much like a fastball, but the pitch has significant lateral movement. He creates and adjusts this movement with the different pressure he puts on the ball with his fingers. The pitch's lateral movement keeps it off the bat's sweet spot, moving in on the hands of a left-handed batter and toward the end of the bat of a right-hander. To a hitter, Rivera's cutter first appears like a straight fastball, making it hard to distinguish the two pitches during the first fractions of a second when the hitter must decide if, when, and where to swing. Hitters often rely on reading a pitch's spin to determine what pitch is coming, but Rivera's fastball and cutter have what appear to the hitter as the same spin. Many pitchers throw their cutters more like sliders, with their fingers pulling down on the side of the ball. This can create more downward and lateral movement than a cutter, but it also creates the signature spin of a slider, a spinning red dot, that the hitter can recognize and adjust to. With identical deliveries and spins on Rivera's pitches, hitters are at a loss to identify and then attack the pitch, until it is too late, and the balls end up in very different locations. Here are the nearly 1,300 pitches that Rivera threw in 2009, each frozen at the point where the batter must make his swing decisions. But with few clues to determine the pitch's ultimate location, the batter can be faced with guessing at these outcomes. Here are the cutters to left-handers. Here are the cutters to right-handers. And fastballs to right-handers. He throws almost no fastballs to lefties. As this map of his 2009 pitches shows, Rivera is remarkably adept at hitting the corners, keeping the ball away from the middle of the plate, the easiest spot for a batter to make good contact.
Looking from this perspective, it's not surprising that the real hot spot is inside on the left. I think he could hit that spot with his eyes closed.
Rivera's simple but effective formula has made him baseball's most dominant closer.
Yeah, so this is a very nice combination of video elements, of visualization, of narration. So again, a nice way to tell a story. So some of you could argue, let's just use descriptive statistics. All of those, I have a good example for you, why not? So here is a data set, or 4 different data sets actually. They have both the rows are the data items, and then we have an X and the Y dimension. So 4 2-dimensional data sets. And if you look at them, you probably don't see lots of variation in the first 3 data sets, but if you look closely, you see that something weird is going on in the 4th data set. So let's run a couple of typical descriptive statistics on that. So we have a mean of X, a Y of 7.5 for all of those 4 data sets. We have a variance of, for X of 11, for Y 4.1. We have a correlation of 0.8. We have a linear regression that is again identical for all of those 4 data sets. So if you just run standard descriptive statistics, for all intents and purposes, those data sets are identical. So what happens if we plot them? This is what you see. This is called Anscombe's quartet. So the first one here is what you would expect. We have like a roughly linear trend, and this data is varying across this line that you would imagine. And then we have this curve in the second data set. We have like a completely linear curve plus 1 outlier in the third data set. And then we have this very bizarre, only variation in Y in this one data set with the exception of 1 outlier. And this is really where visualization comes in. Even if you use descriptive statistics, take a look at your data. Simply plot it, just to spot these kinds of errors. Good data visualization is really about making data accessible and combining the strengths of humans and computers, and about enabling insight and about communicating. So let's talk a little bit about the history of visualization. How did we get here? Of course, all of it started with visualizations that had some kind of spatial relationship. Guys, in the back here, there's a couple of chairs left here if you want to come forward, and there's also 2 seats here and a couple here, so you're welcome to move around if you want to. So the first things that people actually visualized were maps, and obviously that's kind of interesting because they this is a health orientation, and it's also less abstract than, let's say, a bar chart or a scatter plot or something else. So here we have a town map that is from around 6,000 before Christ in Turkey. And here we have a map of the Mediterranean from about 550 before Christ. So these are very early examples of data visualization. And then we have spatial visualizations of the human anatomy by Leonardo da Vinci around 1500. And again here, what we see here, we could render that with a computer. We could take an MRI data set with a computer and render something like that. It's not going to look exactly like that. There is research that tries to sketchify visualizations to make it look like hand-drawn. But the downside here, this is great for a textbook, but it's not great for diagnosing a patient because it's obviously only about one person. So if you need to learn anatomy, this is great. But if you need to diagnose somebody, it's not so good. And then we have here Galileo Galilei's depiction of the moon, and then we have plans by William Curtis. So these are, like, all of these are visual representations of physical artifacts. And then, this is a nice example. There was an interesting discussion in the 19th century about whether a horse, when galloping, if its hooves leave the ground at any point in time. And nobody did know at this point, and it was hotly debated in society. And then Edward Muybridge came along and used photography to simply take many, many pictures of a horse galloping. So what he did is he had threads spanned across like the track where the horse ran, and every time the horse passed like a specific camera, the thread was torn loose and triggered the camera. And this is how he could show that the horse actually completely left the ground, as you can see in the second frame. And here's an animated GIF of the same, of this sequence of pictures. So this is a way, like, where you could use visualization to to resolve a debate. An interesting side story about this guy, Edward Muybridge, he found his wife with her lover in bed at one point, and he then shot him. The interesting point about that especially was that he was acquitted because it was, how's it called? I wrote down the term. Justifiable homicide. Back in the day. These are more abstract representations. We still have, these are things that are like the planetary movement. Of course, they still have a spatial relationship here, but it's a little bit more abstract. So we have planetary movement diagram from the 1950s, and then we have the map of winds, which is of course important for sailors. So the major winds. And if you look at the Dataviz course website, you can see that there is like a very similar rendering of wind nowadays. So this essentially was already a great visualization. And then we have charts that represent abstract data. And William Playfair is one of the early people that drew a lot of those. So here at the bottom left, we have exports and imports from Denmark and Norway to England. So we can see that this also annotates and tells a little bit of a story. It's like we have the exports and the imports both in this one chart, and then we have the first part, we have a balance against England. So England was importing more than exporting to those countries, and then suddenly it flipped over and we have a balance in favor of England. And these are line charts and annotated and line charts in this case. Here at the top right, we have, in this case, we always have it we only have it for two countries, so we only have it for two, like one value for import and export, and those two countries are summarized. But up here on the right, we again have imports and exports, but for many countries. But in contrast to having a time span, this is for a specific time. And in this case, he was using a bar chart. And here at the bottom, we have one of the first pie charts that is known. Visualization was used to find patterns early on. So in 1854, there was a cholera epidemic in London. And at this point, people didn't quite know what was causing cholera. It wasn't really established at this point that germs actually caused diseases like cholera, and people thought it was bad air. So something floating around in the air. And John Snow actually was a physician, and he thought, well, it's waterborne. And at this point in time, London had like a rapid growth in population, and there was simply a lot of sewage dumped everywhere. And what he did in this district in London, he simply plotted every single death by cholera onto the map. And you can see here, like there's lots and lots, like these lines are one depth per house. And you can see in this area here, there's a lot of those depths, whereas up here, there's fewer of them. And what he then added is the position of the nearest water pumps. And then we have one water pump here. So what this told him then is that this one water pump seems to be the reason for the outbreak. The other water pump up here seems not to be infected. There is no cases. Like people that fetch your water from this water pump up here, they don't get sick. People that fetch your water from the water pump down there, they do get sick. So what they did is they closed the water pump and they got the cholera in this area under control. And this is how visualization was used in the 19th century to find patterns. And this is a very well-known example, so you'll find a lot of documentation about it. This is, like, if you ever talk to somebody who knows visualization, probably most people have a printout of this one on their office wall. This is probably the most famous data visualization out there. So this is by Charles Minard, and the guy that popularized it was Edward Tufte. He's a retired professor, and he's kind of like one of the early data visualization gurus. So what this chart plots here is Napoleon's Russian campaign. And what you see here is a flow chart essentially. So like we start here in Paris on the left with the width here represents the size of the army. And you can see every time the flow narrows, people of the army died or split off, like in the case, in the first case here and the second case here. So the idea of this chart is really to show you what was the catastrophe on the march on Moscow on Napoleon's Russian campaign. And you can see that he starts with a pretty large army, which continuously narrows, and he keeps going on to Moscow, and in Moscow he arrives and he actually fights the battle. And the interesting part here is that there doesn't seem to be like a lot of losses in the battle itself. Most of the people died, or more than half of the people already died on the way there. And then retreating from Moscow, the black flow shows you how he retreated from Moscow, and in this case it was winter. So here, what Minard did, he added a temperature chart here. And you can see that like specifically cold events correlate with significant losses in the army. And you can see like this continues, and then here at river crossings, they lost almost, like at this river crossing here, they lost almost half of their army. So this chart really is unique for that it combines like an abstract visualization of data with the spatial representation of a map. It's very well done. It's one of the best examples out there. Of course, this is a very handcrafted, like something that isn't easy to do for general cases with a computer, but still a very, very interesting example of data visualization. And then maps, of course, are also an important topic. And for subway maps, you can either do very faithful representations of a map, or you can do more abstract representations. So here we have a London subway map of 1927, and then we have the more abstract representation of 1933. So here, the spatial relationships of the ground surface are pretty much lost, and this is done essentially to favor typography. So they could print the labels horizontally, they wouldn't have any occlusions and so on. It's debatable which is better. Nowadays, I guess people tend to do a little bit more like a compromise. And here is, if you like New York City and the subway in New York City, New York Times has an interesting feature on the various different map designs. So you can switch through the various map designs that were used over time. Like here, again, we have this very abstract representation that was used in 72, and people kind of moved away from that. It's easier to know it's easier to deal with these kinds of maps if you just need to know station A to station B. But if you need some spatial context, like where's the restaurant that I'm going to, the other maps are probably better. And then here we have another example of geographical versus topological map. So here I could, like I have this is, I think Boston. I can switch between the grid, like dynamically, and the geographic map. It's like, you can see the green line here branches out, the red line, and so on. Another example of a very abstract representation of a Boston city map, of a Boston subway map. And here, this is an interesting twist on that. We have, this is Paris in this case, like this is a regular map of the Paris metro system, and this is interactive. So whenever you click on a station, it is transformed, so that it shows you, with this radial chart, how many minutes will it take you to get to these other places. So like each of these rings is I think, 2 minutes. I don't remember exactly the number, but let's say some time interval, and you can see, like from this particular station, it takes me this and that long to get to this other station. So this uses geometric distortion here, and I can look at other stations, and I can dynamically change between them. So we'll talk about these kind of distortion techniques later on in the class too. And then a little bit of history of interaction. And these are 2 videos I simply love. I hope you can hear them.
Well, in order to construct a meaningful engineering drawing, we have to have several graphical manipulations. Items, several and trillium, can draw straight lines and circles. That's not what you do in the drafting equipment anyway. So they have a very good start. In order to do this, we can position this white spot as a little cross, if you notice, at a desired location. If we press the button, we command the computer to draw a line. It will draw a line from this position where I am now to any subsequent position of my right hand. This is much like a rubber band stuck in 2 pins. One is nailed on the screen here, and the other is at my right hand. So I can position this anywhere I want. Now, I lost tracking there. I moved the pen too fast. And that told the computer to stop drawing the line. Well, if you notice, that bright dot will jump onto the line as I get close to it.
Well, the dot in the center of the cross, when you get close to the line, jumps over onto it.
Correct.
Why does it do that?
It's much like a gravity field at the endpoint, as it's even a higher gravity field. It allows us to position the point exactly on the line, or in this case, exactly at the endpoint. This allows me to move my pen quite coarsely, each floppy on a drawing, and get a precision drawing on at the same time. So now I'm going to draw the second line. And even the third one. Now, in an ordinary pencil paper drawing, all we have is this particular picture. The computer understands the geometry of the drawing. What do I mean? I mean that if I point at this particular point and tell the computer to move that point by another push button command, it will move not only that point, but all 3 lines that are attached to it.
And the delay between it's doing what you want it to is because it's computing all these changes.
That's correct. Now, if I made a mistake, I could delete my mistake by pointing at the line in question.
So that was really something back in the day.
Now, I mentioned before we can draw circles also.
So you can also draw circles. And then there is the mother of all demos, where they introduced devices, computing devices. And this is a 2-hour video, 1 hour 30 video, so if you're interested, take a look at it
Having
later.
gone through these items, I'd like to come in now and begin to tell you something about the implementation. So I'm going to open up under here, talk to you about the control techniques, control devices, control dialogue, and control meta language we're using. Okay, to talk about control devices, we'll use this overhead camera shot, where you can see the devices that I'm using. I use 3, and they're not all standard. We have a pointing device called our mouse, standard keyboard, and a special key set we have here. We're going to go for a picture down in our laboratory in Menlo Park, pipe it up, then show you from another point of view more about how that mouse works. Come in, Menlo Park. Okay, there's Don Andrews' hand, middle part. And in the second, we'll see the screen that he's working. And the way the tracking spot moves in conjunction movements of that mouse. I don't know why we call it a mouse. Sometimes I apologize. It started that way, we never did change it. As it moves up and down or sideways, so it's the tracking spot. And the principles for its operation are waiting to see if you turn it over, Don. Can you hear me, Don? Would you turn it over to the sea, right? Its principle is that there are two wheels that roll on the surface. But since they're right angles and kind of sharp edges, one roll, the other slide in one direction. Each of these wheels controls the potentiometer with a voltage output sampled by an 880 converter. The numbers taken in by the computer at sample times as to what the horizontal vertical components are to be, where it should put the tracking spot. And as the mouse moves over a surface, then each of those wheels either slides sideways without rolling or rolls an amount that very closely duplicates the particular component of horizontal or vertical in the net motion it makes. Alright, if you take a mouse and move it through some closed trajectory back to exactly the same point, usually
So in this video, they also introduced video conferencing, hypertext, hyperlinks, and so on. So this is really, that's why it's called the mother of all demos. It's linked from the slide deck. It's 1 hour and 40 if you're interested to take a look at it. But for the purpose of this course, I just wanted to show you how the human-computer interaction actually started from with graphic devices. And you can also see that some of the things that they use, they also have pedals that didn't catch on. But of course the mouse is still around, and people say that it will die sometimes, and there's all the time dialogue, articles about the end of the mouse, but I'm skeptical, at least for office use. Of course, touch is also an interesting part, but well, we still use the technology that's introduced here in '68. And then we can, of course, also do analysis, and this is a baby name wizard, which is done by Martin Wartenberg and his wife. Martin Wartenberg is a researcher who was at IBM and now is at Google. He's a famous lizardization researcher. And what this shows you is the popularity of names in the United States over time. So you can see Mary, which the mouse rests over here, was the #1 rank in the 1950s, but it seems not to be super popular nowadays. And we can simply, we can also drill down here, or we can switch between both. Only the boys, only the girls. And we can query for specific names. So let's say I'm asking for Andrew. Then I can see, okay, Andrew was pretty popular in the 80s, but then lost popularity in 2000. Anybody want to look up his name or her name? Just shout out your name, I'll punch it in.
Daniel?
Daniel? Well, Daniel was pretty popular in the end of the 70s, but still is a popular name. Anybody else want to try?
Tony.
Tony? Tony? Wow, that was a spike in the 60s.
How about Alexander?
Sorry?
How about Alexander?
Alexander? Let's see.
Yes.
Oh yeah, still pretty popular. This is around the time I was born. So my parents weren't really outsiders. It's interesting. I just recently looked at the list of baby names, and there's some for Austria, and there's some very common names that nobody gives anymore, like Werner. But anybody else want to try?
Shelly.
Shelby. Wow. That's an interesting development. And you can see a lot of pop culture trends in here. Like if there's a big movie with a certain name, then you can see significant trends in having getting this name into use. And you can also see how certain names shift in terms of which gender they're used for and so on. So this is fun to play with. And of course, like this is of course targeted at expecting parents. And then here is a great example of communication. I don't know whether you know Hans Rosling. Hans Rosling, he's from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, and he's a professor of statistics, public health, and he's very active in public policy in like things like birth rate and public health and like Ebola. And now he just recently posted a new video on the refugee crisis in Syria and so on. But this is one of his most famous videos.
About 10 years ago, I took on the task to teach global development to Swedish undergraduate students. That was after having spent about 20 years together with African institutions studying hunger in Africa. So I was sort of expected to know a little about the world. And I started in our medical university, Karolinska Institute, an undergraduate course called Global Health. But when you get that opportunity, you get a little nervous. I thought these students coming to us actually have the highest grade you can get in Swedish college system. So I thought maybe they know everything I'm going to teach them about. So I did a pre-test when they came. And one of the questions from which I learned a lot was this one. Which country has the highest child mortality of these 5 pairs? And I put them together so that in each pair of country, one has twice the child mortality of the other. And this means that it's much bigger the difference than the uncertainty of the data. I won't put you at a test here, but it's Turkey which is highest there, Poland, Russia, Pakistan, and South Africa. And these were the results of the Swedish students. I did it so I got the confidence interval which was pretty narrow, and I got happy, of course. I had 1.8 right answer out of 5 possible. That means that there was a place for a professor of international health and for my course. But one late night, when I was compiling the report, I really realized my discovery. I have shown that Swedish top students know statistically significantly less about the world than the chimpanzees. Because the chimpanzee would score half right. If I gave them 2 bananas with Sri Lanka and Turkey, they would be right half of the cases. But the students are not that. The problem for me was not ignorance, it was preconceived ideas. I did also an unethical study of the professors of the Karolinska Institute that hands out the Nobel Prize in medicine, and they are on par with the chimpanzee there. So this is where I realized that there was really a need to communicate, because the data of what's happening in the world and the child health of every country is very well aware. So we did this software which displays it like this. Every bubble here is a country. This country over here is this is China. This is India. The size of the bubble is the population, and on this axis here I put fertility rate. Because my students, what they said when they looked upon the world, and I asked them, what do you really think about the world? Well, I first discovered that the textbook was Tintin mainly. And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family, and third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1962, 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families and they had relatively short lives. Now what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still 2 types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see, we stop the world, and this is all the UN statistic that has been available. Here we go, can you see there? It's China there moving against better health, they're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, the yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but they, no, longer life, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here, they still remain here. This is India, Indonesia is moving on pretty fast. Bangladesh still among the African countries there, but not Bangladesh, it's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner, and in 90s we we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world. Let me make a comparison that.
So, if you're interested, you can watch this video. It's a TED Talk. It takes 20 minutes. And this Gapminder tool that he shows here is actually available for free on the internet, and it hosts also a lot of the public data here. You can configure it the way you want. You can play these animations yourself, and you can try to record your own story and tell people about what you think is an important issue in the world. Of course, visualization, and like some of you are in the data track, and like why do we have a data track here? Like we're living in this age of big data. Like you're not going to hear the word big data too often in this class. I think it's a little bit of a hyped term, but we have a lot of data. That is true without a doubt. So in 2010 alone, there were about 1,200 exabytes produced, which are largely unstructured. Google stores in 2013 about 10 exabytes. And the hard disk industry ships about 8 exabytes per year. And if you Google, for example, for YouTube cat videos, you will find that there's more than 500 billion, like almost 600 billion results for YouTube cat videos. So like, we simply have a lot of data. And you'll see a lot of XKCD comics in the class. This is one I like that kind of visualizes the size of the data that we're dealing with nowadays. He calculated if you took all the data we have today, like 15 exabytes of data, and stored it onto punch cards, it would cover New England 4.5 kilometers deep. So you can see here, this is the city of Boston, and then you have the ice sheet that was there in the last ice age, and the punch cards would reach even higher than the ice sheet. So just to give you like a little bit of an idea of the scale of the data we're dealing with. Of course, we're not going to visualize all of this data, and many of this data is unstructured in videos and so on. But this also shows you that we have big data. So this is a nice illustration. In 1 second on the internet, there are this many Reddit votes. Then here we have Instagram photos uploaded, Tumblr posts, Skype calls made, tweets posted. Then we have Dropbox files uploaded. Then we have Google searches. Takes a while. I'm gonna keep pressing here. Then we have YouTube's videos watched. Then we have Facebook likes. And this is just 1 second. So 10 years ago, Skype, Facebook, YouTube, and so on didn't exist. And nowadays we have that much data. And then of course there's emails per second. And I'm not gonna, look, when you just look at the scroll bar where it is approximately. I'm not gonna scroll to the bottom. So there's a place for understanding data, for analyzing data. And here's a quote I like a lot. The ability to take data, to be able to understand it, to process it, to extract value from it, to visualize it, to communicate it, it's going to be a hugely important skill in the next decade. Because now we really do have essentially free and ubiquitous data. And then there's the thing that if we try to understand data, we have also to deal with how can, like, what can the human actually process? I can't show you an infinitely complex chart. We have to design for humans. And there's limits of cognition, and this is a fun video that illustrates that. So this guy is asking this bearded guy for directions. Take a look at what happens. So he's completely focused on the task of explaining what is going on, and he's completely focused on, and this is not like a random outlier, this is really, and we'll see a lot of those, in class later. This is called like attention blindness. He's not paying attention to certain things, and that's also important. Like this is of course a psychology lesson, but this is also important when you develop interactive visualizations. And we'll have dedicated lectures to deal with that. And the idea really here is that things make us smart. Like once we started to draw, to write, to manufacture things, we had a better way of communicating our knowledge, of sharing our knowledge, and so on. And of course, the printing press was tremendously influential in books and written books here. And so the idea is that visualization is really about external cognition. That is how resources outside the mind can be used to boost the cognitive capabilities of the mind. Okay, so that kind of finishes the introduction of like the field of visualization, and now I want to take the rest of the time to talk a little bit about the course. What is CS5630 or CS6630? And I will call it just a database course from now on. So first about me, you already heard that I am, this is my second day at Utah. I am an assistant professor now since Monday of computer science. Before that, I was a lecturer and a postdoc at Harvard. So you'll see a couple of Boston-specific examples in the lecture because I gave a very similar lecture last spring at Harvard. I have a PhD in computer science from Austria, my hometown, and this is like a picture I took on a hike, which is about half an hour from my hometown. So I kind of grew up in the mountains, and I'm really looking forward to the Utah mountains. Then we have a guest lecturer, Aaron Knoll. He will give the guest lectures on scientific visualization. There's going to be 4 of those in the second half of the class. He's a research scientist at SKI, the Scientific Computing and Imaging Institute. I'll talk a little about SKI a little more later. And he's really a SciVis expert. He has a PhD from the University of Utah and did a postdoc in Kaiserslautern and at the Argonne National Laboratory. The SKI Institute is where I'm based at, the School of Computing and the SKI Institute. These are all the faculty members of the SKI Institute. And if you're here, if you've been around for a while, you probably have heard of the SKI Institute. We do everything that is related to scientific computing and imaging, like scientific computing, biomedical computing, scientific visualization, information visualization, and image analysis. So if you have interest in any of those areas, you will probably encounter SKI faculty at some point. And if you want to look at what the SKI Institute does in detail, you can go to the ski.utah.edu. And we do a lot of visualization research. I myself am a visualization researcher, so I really feel comfortable teaching this class. And then we have the course staff. I'd like to introduce Alex Bigelow. Would you mind to get up? Alex is going to be one of the TAs. Then we have Zinnia and Anirudh down here. And these guys are going to be our TAs. They're going to help you if you have any issues with homeworks and so on. And yeah, help out wherever they can. So, a couple of questions about you. I need to read my notes. So, I would just like to ask you to raise your hand. So, it's for whom is it the first year here? Okay, so like raise them high so I can see them. Okay, so we have about a third of you are in the first year. Who is an undergraduate? Okay, so like about a quarter of you are undergraduates. Who is a PhD student? Okay, great. That's like another quarter. Who is a master's student? That's about half. So we have about half of you are master's students. Who is a CS concentrator? Again, a little bit more than half, I'd say. Other areas like math, stats, a couple, humanities, social sciences, business, anything else? Like biology, life sciences.
Statistics and big data.
Statistics and big data. Great. So a couple about the technical skills. Who knows JavaScript? Okay, by the end of this class, all hands will go up. Who knows C++ or C? Almost everybody. Great. Java? A lot of people too. Python? Other languages? Who is programming for 1 year or less? Okay, a couple. 5 years or less. Okay, that's the majority, good. And more than 5 years? Great, so we have a skilled class. Any previous visualization experience? Okay, there is also a place for me, it seems. So great. A little bit on enrollment. I've got a lot of emails for permission codes, and I have deferred everybody until now. The thing is, as you can see, the lecture hall is pretty full. We are capped at 88, which is exactly the capacity of the lecture hall. But I assume that, similar to what I experienced at Harvard, that not every one of you is going to come to every single lecture in the future. So I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue in terms of class size. The only issue is the exams. Like we need enough space to actually do exams. And so we're trying to figure out whether we can get a bigger room or not. And if we can't, we will very likely have like an overflow room for the exams, like a seminar room. Our idea is that we can let everybody in. And I will email all of you who emailed me about permission codes. You will hear from me by Thursday. I'll just have to talk to the head of the School of Computing, and we'll figure out how we actually handle this. But I'm pretty confident that everybody will get a spot if he wants to be in this class. So a little bit about the structure and the goals of this class. Just see, I still have time. Okay, so my goal and our goal as the course staff is to teach you how to evaluate and to critique visualization designs first. So like we will, essentially every class, I will put up a visualization here and I'll give you a handout and we'll take 5 minutes in groups to discuss the visualization, and we will then take some time to discuss what is good, what is bad about this visualization. This really is the idea here is that you kind of learn to think methodologically about visualizations, and that you can argue why it is good, why it is bad, and that therefore you learn from examples. The second goal that we will primarily achieve through the first couple of lectures, but mainly through your hacking away on your homeworks and on your projects, is implementing interactive data visualizations. We of course also want to be able to apply fundamental principles and design and techniques. So like we will learn about color, we will learn about the limits of condition and so on. We will learn how to design visual data analysis solutions. It's also, we'll talk briefly about algorithms, how we can integrate visualization with things like clustering, principal component analysis, and so on. And then you will yourself, in groups of 2 or 3, develop a substantial visualization project with a data set of your choosing. So I hope that by the end of the class, each of you could go out and go to any of the Salt Lake City newspapers or to any kind of Twitter data scientist jobs and tell them, hey, I'm a visualization engineer and I can develop visualizations for you. That is kind of the goal that I have for this class. But of course you should also learn something more about the underlying theory and so on. I tried this last semester. I have a no device policy class. So you cannot bring any computers, or you can bring them, but you cannot open them and look into them during class. There's no phones, no tablets, no computers, except for when we use them. And we will use them in the first couple of lectures. I will be teaching mainly about code and Git and so on. So in these classes, it's fine, you should actually bring them and you should code along or try things out live. But when we don't use, when we don't work with technology, when we don't work with code, I will ask you to put away your computers. I know in a computer science class this seems bizarre. The reason for me doing that is, there's a couple actually. So if you want to take notes, some people say, well, I take notes on my computer. Sure, but it's actually, there's studies, and I'm linking on the syllabus, I'm linking to these studies, that show that you remember a lot more if you take the studies by hand. And the reason is that all of you are such great typists that you don't have to think about what you're typing down, you can simply transcribe me verbatim. But if you use handwriting, you kind of just need to decide what are the concepts that you want to put down. And you have this abstraction process helps you to think about what is actually important, and it will actually help you run. And then notifications on Facebook, email, and so on, they're really made to grab your attention. If you get the Facebook like from any of your friends, you have like a red little flag posting up in the periphery of your vision. And this is really what people are drawn to. Like, there's perception studies. If something changes in the periphery of your vision, this is something that you will always draw your attention to. And I'm not sure I can compete with your friend posting his latest cat picture on Facebook. So I'm trying to force you to pay attention by closing your computers. Of course, these companies like Facebook and so on, they have an invested interest in getting your attention, and we're competing here. If any of you has a particular reason for bringing his computer, come to me, talk to me, is of course fine. And again, this applies only to the theory lectures, not to the technical lectures, which will be more common in the beginning, and I'll remind you at the beginning of the theory classes. So, your most important source of information for anything that about this class is the website, datawizcourse.net. You have like the homepage and the syllabus and the schedule, information about the homework project and so on. Some of the things are still in flux, especially the schedule and the homeworks, but other things like the syllabus are pretty solid. So if you find any mistakes, please let me know. But generally, this should be up there and should be your primary point of contact. So a lot of stuff, like I've taught the class similar to this for 4 years now, once as an instructor and 3 times as a head TA. And a lot of the questions that people have are already covered on the website. So please take a look at the website if you have a question about the formalities of the course. This is a class with about 100 students. We have a staff of 4. We simply will be swamped if everybody mails us about everything. And this also brings me to the way we would like to communicate with you. The primary, like if you have any specific questions about any problems, like if you find something in the class interesting, or if you have a problem with your homework or your code and so on, and you're seeking help, we would ask you to use Piazza. Piazza is our course forum, and the idea is that given the limited amount of staff we have, that you guys can help each other. So like, we appreciate it if anybody has had a similar problem, if you post a reply to that. So go to this link, you'll find it on the website, and sign up for Piazza. It's also part of Homework Zero to sign up for Piazza and ask questions there. There's a couple of online students in this class who are only watching through a YouTube live stream. Especially for those, I would encourage you to sign up to Piazza and to ask your questions that you might have on there. We will be holding office hours. All of the staff, I will be holding office hours every Thursday after class. So like, if you want to talk briefly with me after class, you're welcome to come out to here and talk to me. But if it takes a little longer, we will move up to my office in this building on the 3rd floor. And I'll have an office hour for 1.5 hours after class. I will ask you to not come to me with your code and debug in my office hours. So like my office hours are there to deal with any personal issues you might have, and to resolve any theoretical questions. You can also ask me about code, but I'm not gonna like, oh, this isn't working, please help me. That is where the TA's office hours come in. You can go to the TA's office hours with these kinds of issues, and our TAs will hold between 2 and 4 office hours in total per week. And you will find the specific office hours and location on the Google Calendar that is linked from the homepage. You can email me. If it doesn't go on Piazza, you can email me always at alex@sti.utah.edu. You'll find the email addresses for the TAs also on the course website in a couple of days. So this course, as I already hinted at, is structured around 3 different components, but we'll focus mainly on like the 2 things here, theory and coding skills. So I'm trying something a little bit different than I did before. I will be teaching coding skills in the beginning. So the next couple of lectures, we won't be talking a lot about visualization. And if you know Git really, really well, and if you know JavaScript and HTML5 really, really well, the next 2 or 3 or 4 lectures will be boring for you. I'm telling you just now. You don't have to come if you know HTML5, D3, JavaScript, and so on. I'm sure some of you do, but I also know that some of you don't. And this was one of the things that we have different people here with different backgrounds, and we have undergrads, graduate students, people who have been out of school for a while, and so on. So I think it's important that we take a couple of lectures to really just get the technology straight, so that everybody has the same level and everybody is happy with developing the homeworks. So First couple of lectures, not too much about visualization itself, a little bit technical. And I will try something new. I've never done it before. I essentially I'm writing websites, and you can see them on the schedule. There's the one for Thursday is already up there, and you can read this through by yourself. But I'll just go through these examples in class. You're encouraged to bring your computers. In the first lecture on Thursday, we'll set up your Git for the homeworks. I'll tell you what Git is, what it does, and so on. And then we'll talk a little bit about HTML. Next week, we'll talk about JavaScript mainly. And then we'll talk about D3 specifically. And of course, there's also some of the components of this course are also about design skills. So especially for your projects and so on, I encourage you to really draw by hand. Like if you develop a visualization, it's great to sketch. Because by hand, you can iterate very quickly. You can try out different things. So we will have components in the class, usually as an exercise at the beginning of the class, where I ask you to design alternatives to a specific solution or something like that. Okay, one thing to note, of course, is the coding skills. You will need, I will teach you some things in class, but this, computer science isn't really about teaching you how to code. You're not going to be great software engineers when you're done with this class. You will have to study yourself. So I'll teach you the basics, or we will teach you the basics, but you will have to Google for Stack Overflow answers, to read the documentation, to read the books, and you will have everybody who codes. I can't code without being online because all the time I'm running into problems, and then I need to resolve them. So you kind of need to learn this process of learning yourself, which is important for this class too. So I think I covered that. You can see the schedule on the website. So we have lectures every Tuesday and Thursday here in this room from 9:10 to 10:30. We have a YouTube channel that streams this lecture live. You can see the camera right here. This will also be archived, so you can look at the lecture later. We have the office hours, see the Google Calendar. I already talked about that. And on the lectures, you will also find the reading. So for this lecture here, there's no mandatory reading, only recommended readings. But for the next lecture on Thursday, there is already a mandatory reading. But it's not in the screenshot yet. I updated it yesterday. And the screenshot is a little older. So the schedule is really your main point of looking at what is going on, what is next. You also see the homeworks and so on. The Google Calendar also contains this information, but it only contains homework 1 due and or lecture and so on. It doesn't provide any context. So take a look at this schedule whenever you want to learn something about what's going on in the class. There's 2 required textbooks. This one is what you need right now. There's an online version of that is free. And this is really like an introduction to D3 and JavaScript. And we will be going through this very quickly. And it's a book, if you sit down for a weekend, you should be through with that. So it took me about 5 hours or 6 hours to go through and to implement most of the examples myself. So it's not too much of a hassle. If the first mandatory reading is 3 chapters out of this book, which sounds a lot, but it's actually not. I recommend if you don't read it in bed, but sit down in front of the computer and do the examples. That's important because then you will learn something. And for the theory part, we will use this excellent book by Tamara Mansner. It's called Visualization Analysis and Design. I will probably be allowed to link to a preprint of this online. I will have to check. I think that you did it last year, right? So I think we will be fine linking to a preprint of the book. It's not going to be as good. I recommend you buy both of them. This one is a little bit more expensive. This is like a regular O'Reilly book. This is a textbook. This is very, very good for theory. It can be a little dense. So every sentence in this book is very well thought out. And even if you read it as a visualization researcher, you kind of, that's what she meant. It's sometimes a little bit of a dry reading, but it's a great structure, and I really recommend it. Okay. In terms of programming, I already talked about this, so I can just skip that. And now, some of you might think, I'm not sure whether this course is really for me. So, the prerequisite for this course is you should have some programming experience. Some of you emailed me about this. If you don't have programming experience, in HTML5, for example, then like as long as you know what the function is, what the for loop is, what the if statement is, and any of this basic, what the variable is, and so on, if you put in the time and the effort, you will survive in this class. But if you don't know these concepts, it might not be the right class for you. You should kind of know C++, Java, Python, or any of those languages. Then it won't be terribly hard for you. It's really about the willingness to learn new software and tools. And of course, this can be time-consuming. So we're trying to like ease you in with the first homeworks, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult as we go along. And I've already mentioned you will need to build the skills yourselves. I have about 60 seconds. No, I don't have, but I guess you're still interested in that. I hope you excuse me if I'm 2 minutes too long. So we'll have 6 homework assignments. Most of them are 1 week. They vary between 2 and 10% of your total grade, depending on how difficult they are. They will take a while if you don't know JavaScript and D3 yet, but otherwise you should be fairly quickly. They're always due on Fridays. You have 2 late days. Every day you hand it in late, you will lose 10%. So sometimes this can be a trade-off that you can make. If you need more than 2 late days, we usually don't do that. If you have like a very good reason, you can email us about it. But typically the answer is no, unless you have a medical issue or some severe personal reason. You will still lose 10% unless like serious medical issues and so on. We have a final project which is 40% of your grade. So you should start thinking about your final project soon. It's in teams. And we have 2 milestones. The first one is less important in terms of grade, but it's important to get your feedback from us. And then you will hand in the final milestone. For the projects, we will also have like best project nominations, and these will get extra credit in addition to, like I mentioned, in the Hall of Fame and links on our website. And then we have 2 exams, 10% each, one before the fall break, one before the finals. In class, not super complicated. It's really just to reinforce the theory a little bit. So that shouldn't be too difficult, but if you come to class, then you shouldn't really have to study hard for them. They are going to be closed book, so no computers, no books, and so on. And I talked about this. It's not so important. So the last thing that I want to say is do homework 0. If you haven't done it, do it today. Especially sign up for your GitHub educational accounts. You need private repositories that GitHub gives you for free when you sign up with your educational email address, but this takes time. And you will have to have this working by the end of next week, and sometimes it takes longer. So do this today if you haven't done it yet. This is important. This is the last thing. I hope to see everybody on Thursday. I'm looking forward to the rest of the semester. Have a great start.